here with Grit Talking. I made this channel because I would love to invite you into my life and what it's like to have ADHD and struggle in a positive way with a growth mindset through it. And if you have ADHD, you know that it can be extremely difficult to, on a day-to-day basis, find ways to either motivate yourself, focus, or communicate with others that you care about things. It's just that you feel like you can't do them. That's probably a concept that's difficult to understand for people who don't have ADHD. But if you do have ADHD, this is a platform just to allow me to share and just say that, hey, you're not alone. These are things that we can work through together. My journey with ADHD kind of started when I was in high school. I went from a straight A student to a straight C student, and I couldn't really explain why. It wasn't until college when I figured out, like, wow, there's something going on with me. I have switched, my major 500 times. I've gone to 5 different schools. Man, there just must be something going on. I can't remember exactly where I started hearing about ADHD, but I at some point decided maybe I should get checked out for it. And they, took me into the room where they do like the R and the Z, and they show you, and you have to click the button. And sure enough, like I had it. Why it's taken me this long to really want to discover more about ADHD and more about the way that my brain works, because as I've learned and progressed, I definitely had it all of my life. And it wasn't until recently that I found out. I wish I would have known sooner and just picked up some of these things that I've learned on how to moderate it sooner. But yeah, so I don't know. So I'm inviting you into my journey to figuring out more about how my brain works, and not as like a discouraging thing, like, oh wow, like my brain, it doesn't work right, but more like an empowering thing, like, wow, knowledge is power. Now I know how my brain works, and now I know how I want to move forward and work with my brain and understand myself and give some grace as to how to move forward with really important things in my life. For me, this looked like, or I guess right now it looks like, very intense career change, because as an ADHD brain, you do need things that stimulate your brain, things that will release that dopamine, and we'll get a little into that later. But it's a pretty big deal, and if you're not interested in something as someone who has ADHD, chances are you're probably not going to do it. Let's just switch gears here, and I just want to talk a little bit about dopamine. So you can think of dopamine and its importance as it relates to someone who has ADHD brain as a conductor. So if you think about a wonderful, orchestra going on, the conductor shows up and is like, hey, cellos, you start now. Violinists, you start now. Flute, you start not now. That is actually the role that dopamine plays in everyone's brain. So not just people with ADHD, but everyone's brain. And so someone who doesn't have ADHD, the conductor comes and creates this beautiful, beautiful orchestra. But someone who has ADHD, the conductor is compromised, or something is wrong with the conductor, and he comes in and everyone is playing at the same time. It sounds like a mess. And so if you could imagine this on a practical day-to-day, who have ADHD, because their dopamine is off, their concentration is off, their focus is off. Sometimes it's a hard time it takes a long time to get them motivated. And this manifests itself in organization problems, not being able to complete specific tasks, losing interest often, things like that. People who don't have ADHD, typically, even if they don't like something, they can will themselves into doing it. But people who do have ADHD can't really do that. So if they aren't interested in it, then they won't typically do it. Unless the consequence is dire enough. And there are some studies where if the consequence is dire enough, then it will push someone who has ADHD to doing something that they don't want to do. But it's a very rare thing, and it's kind of a case-by-case basis. My goal is to find behavioral, dietary, just different ways and just practical tips to help the conductor of my brain. And what I have found so far has been extremely interesting. So just even the discovery of dopamine being the reason why people who have ADHD can't necessarily do things that they don't want to do. And it's not because we don't want to do them, it's just that our brain prevents us from doing them. One cool thing that I found out that I just want to speak about today is actually the use of cold water. So there is a new study that's been released, and I will try and link that in the information below. But a new study has been released where there were test subjects, humans that they put into tubs of varying degrees of water. What they found was that the coldest, it ranged from warm water to all the way down to really cold water. And so what they found was that the people who were, they could breathe, their head was above the water, but people who were in the cold water for, at least 15 minutes, they took their blood afterwards to test all of their hormonal and chemical levels of their blood. And what they found was that their dopamine levels were 250% above their baseline level. Not only did the dopamine percentage increase that much, but it was sustained for a long period of time after that, being submerged in the water for a long time. What did I do today? Well, I went on my run and I did some strength exercises, and after that I took a cold shower. I'm going to keep doing it and incorporate it into my day-to-day routine and kind of follow up and let you guys know how it's going, but it definitely helped. Obviously, don't take my word for it, I wasn't in an actual tub, and in the study, there are some discussions about whether or not the release of cortisol as a result of being in cold water is going to be a problem in terms of cold water therapy. But like I said, I'll attach the link to the study, and you guys can delve a little bit more into this concept of dopamine being relative to your baseline. So any addiction at all, video game addiction, meth addiction, cocaine addiction, any addiction really, even alcohol and anything. Maybe you're addicted to reading mystery novels or something, even porn addiction and addictions, right? Instagram addiction. You can be addicted to anything really. These are attributed to dopamine specifically. All of them have dopamine involved. So whenever you do these things, dopamine is released in your brain. It likes dopamine. It's always going to chase after more dopamine. You look at something, you see, you like what you see, dopamine's released, you want to see that again, or do that thing again. So your baseline, and there is actually a term for it, it's called tonic and phasic. And phasic is where it is the dopamine level that your brain achieves at, when it's doing something that it likes, or, people call it a dopamine hit, but that's actually it's not correct to call it that, because you have dopamine regulating throughout your body, and it's just a lot more complicated than that. But this idea of dopamine being relative to your baseline is very important in figuring out how to modulate your own dopamine. Once you reach a dopamine level, your baseline tends to rise to meet that level. What this looks like is for example, drug addicts. If someone takes a drug and they get high, they're going to need more and more of that drug to get the same euphoric feeling as before. Or if it's video games, you're going to have to play longer in that video game or longer on Instagram or X, Y, and Z, and you can kind of get the point. This is interesting because if you actually are searching for dopamine as a way to regulate like your mood and your focus as someone with ADHD, or even more practically, if you're taking ADHD medication, you are going to have to take more and more dosage to reach that, level of dopamine where your brain is happy and can function properly. This and the knowledge of this actually made me want to get off of my medication, and that is because I am desiring to get my baseline back to a low level, so that I can moderate it and modulate it using everyday, like day-to-day things. But if I have that high level of dopamine in me because of my medication, it's actually going to be harder for my body to make dopamine over the span of my lifetime. And so I've made the hard decision to taper off my medication, and I will, part of the reason why I started this video is because I want to track my progress and all of my findings. So I will keep doing that, but the truth is that there's not a quick fix to ADHD. There's not a magic thing where all of a sudden it's going to go away. The point is to work with yourself and really learn yourself and your brain and what type of foods maybe make you focus less. Like for me, it's like cheese, dairy products. Some people, it's any type of food they have like a sensitivity to, that you eat and then afterwards you're like, whoa, I literally can't sit down, or I can't focus, or really listen to your body and try and figure out what causes you to focus and like what doesn't, and what works for you and what doesn't. And that's the point. That's the point that I'm trying to make, is that it really is person to person specific, and you kind of have to go into this journey with yourself where you're willing to try new things, and accept yourself, because having ADHD is very difficult, very difficult. Hopefully this will empower you to not feel defeated about having ADHD, but feel excited, because the truth is not everyone gets the opportunity to conquer such a challenge as to learn about yourself and really it's a challenge. It's a challenge figuring out how to succeed with ADHD. So if you like this, go ahead and click the like button. If you want to see more, go ahead and click the subscribe button, and I'll be posting as much as I can. Meanwhile, thanks for listening to my video, Grit Talking, where I motivate you to struggle positively through your ADHD. All right, have a nice day. Bye.